It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show, only on Secular Media Network.
Hello, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the cleverly titled Phil Ferguson Show. It is now the day after Trump apparently is elected president, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then after we talk about Trump and his potential effect on the stock market, I'm going to talk a little bit about my mom. The last episode I did, I had mentioned that she had gotten sick. Well, she has now passed away, so I'll give you a little more details about that. And before we get into that, of course, I do want to talk about Trump. Last night, like many people, I watched the news and was surprised, like pretty much everybody. I think the vast majority of Trump supporters were surprised how well he did. And matter of fact, it looks like as of now, and everything's not final, Trump not only won the popular vote, but clearly won the Electoral College, which was not expected. Last I saw at 538, they gave him something like a 28% chance of winning. But it doesn't matter what the predictions were, he has won. And so the big question that I have gotten a couple of emails and a phone call already, and thankfully it's about 1% of my clients. And I wouldn't be surprised if another percent or 2 or 3 want to contact me in the next couple of days to ask about what to do with their portfolio. So the first part I want to cover is what to do with your portfolio. Change nothing. Do not panic. If you must, carry a towel around with you, but do not panic. I have no way of knowing, you have no way of knowing what is really going to happen because of the markets. Last night, market futures were off as much as 5%. Thankfully, at the open of the markets today, the futures were down 1.5%, and so that's a much bigger improvement. Markets hate uncertainty, and when the markets as a whole expected Hillary to win, that was the odds-on favorite, and she doesn't, that creates uncertainty, and markets generally freak out a little bit. I'm not saying the markets are going to be great going forward, but I'm also not saying they're going to be horrible going forward. I am saying I have no fucking clue what's going to happen. That's my stance for this issue. That's my stance for virtually all issues when it comes to the stock market. It doesn't predict well that way. If it did, there would be people out there making way more money and selling their plan. And then, of course, as soon as they sell their wisdom and insights of how to beat the market, it won't work anymore. So even if you do find something that used to work, it won't work going forward once people know about it. If you are a long-term investor, it's not going to matter in the end. Remember, over the last 200 years, we've had things like the Civil War, World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Richard Nixon, George W. Bush. And through all that time, the market has averaged a return of 10%. If you take out inflation of 3%, it's a return of 7%. That's going to be what it's going to do in the future. I don't know that as an empirical fact. You're right, but I have no other way to judge than what has happened for 200 years. If it's completely different and Trump ruins everything and our entire economy is fucked and devastated, well, then it doesn't matter where your money was anyway. So if you think the worst is going to happen, it won't matter. It probably won't be the worst. People have been very unhappy with their presidential nominee and victor in the past. There were a lot of people upset when Obama got elected and thought he would ruin the country. And I think it went quite splendidly. Matter of fact, I would have voted for a third term myself. But as far as what's going to happen next, I think the biggest thing that you're going to have to worry about is health care. The Republican Party has had a hard-on to destroy what is called Obamacare ever since the day that it passed, and every single time Obama vetoed it. Obama will not be there in February of 2017. So if you have health care through one of the statewide programs, you might be concerned. You might be in for a change. Will it take effect immediately? I hope not. And I also hope that while Republicans felt like they could destroy Obamacare with reckless abandon because they knew that Obama was going to veto them crushing Obamacare, maybe, fingers crossed, maybe now they'll be a little more reasonable and they'll add some things back in that don't make it as horrible while they can still boast that they've taken apart Obamacare. What that will be like, I don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know, and that's one of them. But that's something that for some people I would be worried about. My kids are 19 and 21 and no longer in college. Will they be able to stay on my plan? I don't know. When will they have to get off and get their own insurance? That's a problem for them. It might be a problem for me if they can't afford it. So those are things to worry about. I think the closest modern-day analogy in reference to stock markets is probably the Brexit. That was where England voted to leave the European Economic Union, and markets around the world went crazy. The U.S. market went down 3.2% the first day, and I think the English market went down around the same amount, 3% plus. And, of course, some markets went down 10, 15% in a very short period of time. And I'm looking at the London Stock Exchange right now, and it's up considerably from where it was in June before the Brexit. So it had a big shock, and then everybody calmed down and realized that, first of all, for England, it's going to take 2 years for them to get out, and then they're going to have to renegotiate. And most deals will negotiate pretty much in the same general area. There will be some very big specific winners and some very big specific losers. And I don't know what those are. I'm not an expert on the British economy. And in the United States, there will be certain people that are affected and certain people that feel like they've lost by Trump being elected. And those are probably people that didn't vote for Trump. And there will be a lot of people who feel like they've won and it's a new day and a new era. And clearly, if 50 million people vote for Trump, 50 million people are probably pretty darned excited today that he won. And if those people are excited and that transfers into an increased optimism about the markets and about the economy and about the direction of America, because they're no longer being told to be afraid. They're now being told to be happy because Trump is elected. And they go out and spend, and they buy more things for Christmas in the next few weeks. Our economy could do quite wonderfully. Another thing that Trump has proposed, and now the Republicans might actually vote for it because they don't have to oppose Obama, or at least maybe they'll do it next year, is spending a lot of money on infrastructure, roads, bridges, maybe even trains. It's something that Trump has actually supported. The ironic thing is Trump has supported this massive spending while cutting taxes. So that could be a problem. It will be interesting to see if the people who are inappropriately freaked out about our debt suddenly don't care anymore because it's not Obama doing it. Or at least not Obama as president, while Congress does it, more appropriately to say. So they didn't seem to care so much when Bush was in charge, and maybe they won't care when Trump cuts taxes and spends more money at the same time. On the other hand, it could be something where Republicans finally cut a lot of benefits for middle-income and low-income people. So if you are on some kind of disability or Social Security payments, not for retirement, but insurance, or if you're getting food stamps, unemployment, I would be a little more nervous, not necessarily because of Trump, because Trump can't make the laws. Congress does that, and it looks like it's going to be Republican just like it was under Obama. So the big problem is that there's not going to be anyone there to veto it. Of course, there's a concern from liberals about who will be appointed to the Supreme Court. We have an opening because the Congress refused to even consider Obama's last appointment, which I think should be considered dereliction of duty, and they should have lost their jobs if they refuse to vote. That's their job. If you can't do your job, why am I paying you to be there? So I'm not in charge, so, that's what happened, and Trump will be able to appoint a new Supreme Court justice right away, and there's a possibility of another one or two in his first 4-year term. And, of course, his vice president is, unfortunately, just as bad, if not worse than him, Mike Pence from Indiana. So that's a lot to look for. Things will change. Some things will lose. Some people will lose, and those things and or people might lose a lot. So there's going to be problems. But there will be other sectors that could do quite well. One thing pops into my mind, and it's something that I support, which I know surprises people, but the United States corporate tax rate is too high. Matter of fact, in an ideal world, I would suggest that the corporate tax rate should be 0, and then if any money leaves the corporation to go overseas or to any investor, then it should be taxed. And maybe that rate's higher, but not taxing the corporations it will encourage them to all stay in the United States, to leave their money in the United States and invest in the United States. And if corporate tax rates cut from 35%, which most companies aren't paying anyway, down to 0, just maybe a lot of them will bring money back that they have hidden around the world, and they'll say 15% sounds like a pretty good deal. We bring it back hundreds of millions, tens of billions of dollars, pay tax on it, and now we can invest it however we want. There's no way to know. So I guess I'll end with the same thing that I started with. There's no way to know what's going to happen. So if you're a long-term investor, don't panic. If you are a client of mine, you do not need to call or email and ask me what my advice is, because I just told you we're going to stay the course. The market might go up. It might go down. That's my stance. It's been my stance for 20 plus years. It will continue to be my stance. I am not saying that the market cannot go down. It might. It might go up. I don't know. That's the essence of not knowing. So if you are 10 years or less from retirement and you have all of your money in the stock market, you probably shouldn't be doing that in the first place, whether there's a Trump or a Clinton in the White House. If you are not sure how to proceed or how to change to a slightly more conservative portfolio, or if you don't know how to build the cushion, you may email me. That's phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and we can talk about that. But anyone that's not near retirement, just keep investing, keep adding as much as humanly possible. Don't fall for the suck-ass minimum of 10%. Shoot for 20%. Save money, invest, just rinse. What is that, like the shampoo? Rinse, lather, repeat. Just keep doing that year after year after year, and it'll be fine. And now my big pivot. I'm going to talk about personal stuff. I'm going to talk about my mom. On September 30th, early in the morning, about 1:30, she called me, and I actually happened to be out of town that day, to tell me that she had extreme back pain and thought maybe she should go to the hospital. And it's one of those things in my life. I've developed this personal philosophy that if you call somebody to tell them that maybe either you or someone that you're helping maybe should go to the hospital, just go. Call the ambulance. She was worried about the fact that she might have to pay her $50 or $75 Medicare deductible to pay for an ambulance. But if you're in that much pain that at 1:30 in the morning you're calling me, call the ambulance. She had Medicare, and we went. Since I was out of town, my wife heard the message because she also called my wife and took her to the clinic first thing in the morning. And unfortunately, not only did she have extreme pain, but she was quite jaundiced. For those of you who don't know, that means your skin and even the whites of your eyes have turned yellow. It's usually a bad sign, often a problem with the liver, although with a little research, I think I learned that other things can cause that. But went to the ER department, and I came home as quick as I could. And they did 2 ultrasounds and then a CT scan. I think that's the same as a CAT scan, a CT scan. Yeah, I'm not the medical expert, so don't worry about it. And they told her that day on the 30th that she probably had cancer. Now, the irony of it, or the coincidence of it, I guess, and then my wife is much more apt to figure these things out and point them out to me, it was the exact same day, 5 years later, that my dad had died. And he had cancer, although that wasn't the immediate cause of death. It was going to be. Exactly 5 years to the day, my mom was told that she probably had cancer. Checked into the hospital and stayed for 9 days, and they did tests and all kinds of things to try to figure out what we can do next. What are your options? And the big problem was that she got diagnosed with mass B-cell lymphoma, which is cancer in the lymph nodes, and it had metastasized. It was throughout the entire body. So radiation or anything localized or surgery were not even an option. The only thing that was possible is chemo in a young, healthy 30, 40, even a 50-year-old with lymphoma caught at a reasonably early stage. Survival rates can be as high as 80%. I mean, permanent remission, 80%. You live a normal lifetime. So it was not a horrible diagnosis by name, by lymphoma, but unfortunately she was 81. She was diabetic. She had a quadruple bypass 4 years previously and was very weak and in a lot of pain from her current condition. And they were proposing possibly doing chemo at half rate, and a couple people threw out numbers of probability of success of around 20 to 30% that it would work. But the chemo itself might wipe her out because she was in a weakened state, so they wanted to wait. After spending 9 days in the hospital, we were able to go back to her apartment, and I stayed with her for 4 days to make sure she could get up and walk to the bathroom and get to dinner and do all those things for herself. Her first day at home was the best, and unfortunately we went downhill every day for 4 days until I ended up being the one calling an ambulance, and they took her back to the hospital, and we found out that she had what's called sepsis. And again, if you're not real hip on medical terms, that means an entire body-wide infection, and she had E. coli was detected in her bloodstream. And so this is a very, very serious medical condition, and there is a distinct possibility that it will kill you. A couple doctors told me if I had waited 1 or 2 more days to bring her in, that she probably would have died in her apartment. So they started treating the sepsis with high-power batteries of antibiotics, and she also was getting more jaundice again. In her previous visit, they had put a stent into her liver to open up the bile duct that relieves all the fluids from the liver into the intestine, and that's in the area the cancer was, by the way, which is why she had turned jaundice. The cancer had grown so much, almost a half an inch, up into the liver, that the cancer had grown over the top of the opening of the stent. And so when your cancer grows half an inch in 10 days, that's a very bad sign. Just in case you didn't know, you probably figured that out. They took that stent out and put another longer stent in, and as the way the surgeon described it to me, is that the stent will last long enough, which means the stent is going to last longer than she will. It's not going to be a problem. She won't become jaundice again, but she won't live long enough to become jaundice. Unfortunately, a few days after that, it was determined through testing and blood samples that her liver had given up. It became metastasized itself, and a significant portion of it had gone from liver cells to cancer cells, and the liver stopped, and they informed us that there was nothing more they could do. There was no way to do chemo. Matter of fact, there was flat out nothing that they could do or fix. And so we transitioned into what they call comfort care. And comfort care means basically try to make the person feel as comfortable as possible. And for the first day or two after that, it worked out pretty well. The pain medications weren't so strong, but, she clearly wasn't having the best time of her life. And after a day or two of that, she really wasn't competent and she wasn't able to communicate well. And thankfully, from her first visit, all of her kids, me and my 2 brothers, and all of her siblings were able to visit and talk to her. So that was very nice. It wasn't something where just poof, she died and no one was able to get that last meeting in and get that closure. So pretty much everybody was allowed that opportunity. And unfortunately, now we get to the point where you wait and you sit and wait for death. And that probably disturbed me as much, if not more, than the fact that my mom was going to die. I did have the thoughts, just like I did when my dad was in a very similar situation 5 years earlier, of putting a pillow over her head and making it stop. And I don't know if that was more because it would make me feel better. I know that sounds really weird, so forgive me if that really, really bothers you. I guess don't judge me too much unless you've walked in my shoes. It's very painful to see a loved one suffering, knowing that in a few days they're just going to die anyway. We treat pets better than this. And I think in a future show, after I give myself a few more weeks, we're probably going to have on someone from Death with Dignity or some related group, because quite frankly, the last 3 or 4 days of my mom's life, she was not cogent. She was not able to communicate. She was not able to get any joy or benefit. And matter of fact, it was just pain and suffering with the maximum dose of morphine allowed by law, at least in the state of Illinois. And I remember at one point in time, a day or two before she passed, where she was moaning and whimpering and crying, and it reminded me of like a little child that has the flu. A lot of pain, just general discomfort, and things in her body were starting to fail and shut down and breaking. And the nurse came in with the next 10 milligrams of morphine. I did a little research on this, so forgive me for being a fan of Dr. Google, but for most people, a milligram or 2 of morphine is going to help you sleep a nice long night. They were giving her 10 milligrams an hour. And because of the half-life of morphine, she might at any point in her body have, 40, 60 milligrams of morphine. And you're starting to get close to levels that could theoretically kill somebody. And so they came in with the next shot of 10 milligrams and said, "I'm so sorry, we have to wait 5 minutes." And I said, "She's in pain now. Can't you give it to her now?" And they said, "We have to wait 5 minutes. We can't do it any sooner than an hour." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, with a straight face, that it might kill her. And I was kind of at a point where I was like, well, then go ahead and give it to her. I don't know. It might be a highly contested issue for my listeners, so hopefully this is not too graphic or too sterile. I've had several weeks to deal with this, so it may sound like I'm not as worked up and as emotional as I should be, but trust you, it's kind of haunting. So we went through that from Monday until Sunday morning. My wife stayed with her over Saturday night because it was obviously that things were getting worse at a faster rate. And I came nice and early in the morning, and I was there for about an hour and sitting next to my mom and occasionally telling her stories, occasionally holding her hand, occasionally checking Facebook because there's not a whole lot to do in a hospital room. And then it got quiet. The raspy, gurgling, desperate breath for life that was coming every few seconds stopped. And I jumped up and I got real close to her to see if it was just a longer than normal pause or if it was over. And I put my hand up to her mouth to see if there was air moving back and forth. And there was an exhale. And I think that was the last bit of muscles quitting, relaxing. And I cried a little and held her hand and pushed the button to call the nurse. And a couple minutes later, the nurse comes in and she says, "What do you need?" And I said, "She stopped." She goes, "What do you mean she stopped?" And I go, She stopped. The mechanism, the machine that is the body has stopped. So she did her job and checked and called a second nurse. You have to have a second person to call a death, at least in this hospital. And then we went on to next steps, and we, prepared all of the details for the funeral. My wife and I spent an entire week cleaning out her apartment, and our house kind of now looks like we should be on an episode of Hoarders, because she moved out of her house in March, and we still hadn't quite figured out what to do with everything from the house. And now, in a few short days, we took everything that was valuable, everything that was in her entire life, every piece of something that was precious is now possibly junk. It's an amazing thing. So a few things that we learned about this whole process. One, if you or a loved one goes into a hospital, make sure there is someone else there with you as much of the day as possible. Doctors pop in and give you important information and then leave. And they don't email you. They don't leave you a voicemail to tell you what they just told the patient. And in my mom's case, a lot of times, because she was on pain medicine, she was out of it. So, if I come back in a couple hours later and ask her what happened, she wasn't awake. She can't possibly know. And the hospital on a couple occasions made mistakes. There were times where someone didn't refill the IV, and after she got back from one test, it took me 2 hours to get her IV turned back on, because a tech would walk into her office to check, or our office in her room to check on her. And I said, we just got back, and the IV needs to be hooked back up. And they said, well, the nurse has to do that. Let me go get one. And they disappear. 30, 40 minutes later, a different tech comes in. We need to get this IV hooked back up. They disappear to go get a nurse. And so what I ended up doing was placing my chair out in the hallway and sitting by the entrance to her door, because, and I don't think anyone meant bad or wasn't doing their job. They were just too busy. The hospital, like any business, is trying to keep its labor costs low. And so sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 patients all wanted things at the same time, and there were only 3 or 4 nurses available. So they can't be everywhere at the same time, and I think that's the failing. So I actually lodged an official complaint with the hospital itself, and it was amusing because I've been around in the corporate world. Immediately after I got off the phone, I went to the nurse that was on a shift, and I said, I wanted to let you know that I've done this, and it's not about you. Because the person that I called takes the information, and they sound all sympathetic, and they're going to report it, and they take all kinds of notes, and they probably give it to their boss, and their boss goes to some doctor, and some doctor goes to another doctor, and that doctor comes to the head nurse, and that head nurse comes to the nurse that's on duty at the time and says, what the fuck is going on? So I didn't want her to get completely blindsided. I didn't want her to think that I was ratting her out for doing anything wrong. She wasn't. Matter of fact, I don't think any of the nurses particularly did anything wrong. There just weren't enough bodies there to take care of us the way we wanted and the way we expected. So if you or a loved one goes into a hospital, please find some way for someone to be with them at least the vast majority of the waking hours, because different doctors come to different parts of the day just to make it difficult for you. So do that. Another thing that I'm kind of working on now is reconciling her accounts. And thankfully, it's not anywhere near as bad as it could be, because the vast majority of my mom's accounts had beneficiaries. They were set up for things to happen after she passed. So a lot of it's just going to flow straight through the system without real problems. And I think, and I'm still... we have an appointment with the attorney. We're going to be able to completely skip probate, because the vast majority of her assets are set up to pass from her to the next person. And luckily, because she sold the house 6 months ago, she didn't have any property. And only a few weeks ago, she sold me her old used car. So she doesn't have any real property. I mean, there's things in the house, like a 20-year-old couch and some chairs and clothes, but that doesn't really count, I think. And the small banking accounts, 2 had my name on them, 1 had my wife's name on it. So a lot of this is going to be relatively easy for us. It's still painful and annoying, and it's interesting when I call banks, they often, you call twice and you get 2 different answers at exactly what you need to bring in or what you need to provide for them to get the money out. And one of her banks, I guess I'll say the bank, at TFC Bank, you can't call the local bank. They don't have a number, allegedly. And I called customer service, and they said, yeah, just pop in with the death certificate, and it'll be fine. And I said, really? It's that easy? And they're like, yeah, why wouldn't it be? And I explained to them the little bit I knew about transfer of assets, and they're like, oh, let me get my manager on the phone. And so a supervisor for the customer service department comes on and goes, oh, no, you're going to have to do this and this and this. So, we do have a few steps to work through. So if you are, in retirement or close to retirement, think about reconciling some of your accounts. Try to have not as many. Make sure the accounts that you have beneficiaries selected, because that makes life a lot easier. It's really clear where you want the money to go. And I understand that you may have a will, and that's great. If you have a portfolio or assets, especially if you have a house or other property, land, apartment buildings, make sure you have a trust. Really, have a trust and have the land and everything owned by the trust. It's something you're going to need an attorney for, and it may cost you $2,000 to $5,000 depending on how complicated the trust is. But the trust becomes a living entity, and you become the trustee, and you manage the trust for your own benefit, and you can do whatever you want. But when you pass, or when you and your spouse passes, if the trust is in the name of two people, the trust clearly dictates and clearly articulates to everybody what happens to all of the belongings and who is supposed to take care of it. So that makes things a lot easier. If you're an average American and you've got $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and that's about all you've got, you won't need a trust. A will would be really great. So anyway, that's far longer than I expected to talk about that, so forgive me. Our little shortened show. Hopefully next week we'll get back onto the regular schedule. As for me, in a few hours, my wife and I are going to go enjoy a day at a park and maybe have a nice dinner, because it's really kind of the first full day where we have nothing, no obligations to do. So I wanted to get this out of the way because of the Trump election inspired me, I guess, to make this episode. And then tomorrow, Thursday, the 10th of November, I am going to spend about 6 hours driving to Skepticon. And this is going to be kind of a back to reality moment for me, where I get to go to a conference. I was going to go to an event in Milwaukee for the Mythicists of Milwaukee. I was going to go to the FFRF convention in Pittsburgh a few weeks ago, and had to cancel those events. At least I had to cancel my appearance at those events because of the issues with my mom. So I'm getting back to the normal routine. So if you have called me, left me a voicemail or an email, and I've not responded to you, or it's not been very quick, my apologies. Give me another message. I'd be happy to schedule you, and next week should be a regular full-time schedule, and we can get things done. And the one last thing I think I wanted to go over a little bit is when I had on the previous show that my mom was ill, I received a lot of emails, a lot of messages, Facebook, text, even a couple on Twitter, I think, phone calls from people that listened to the show that were so incredibly kind and generous. And I don't know how to properly thank you, so I'll just do a pathetic attempt here to say thank you. It really, really was a delightful and wonderful surprise of all the love and affection that I've gotten from listeners of this show, and I really do appreciate it. Everything from, if you need help, let me know, to don't worry, take some time off and do your show when you're ready. It is all appreciated, and I am thankful to all of you. The other thing that's really weird, even though I only had one show in pretty much the last month, this month is bigger than all but 2 or 3 previous months, because people still download old shows. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And maybe next week I'll read a few comments from iTunes or somewhere that people have written. I haven't even checked because I'm really just trying to get back on my feet. So anyway, I'll wrap up with that. This was show 189, the day after the elections in the United States of America 2016. And I hope to see you at Skepticon or some future convention. Until then, ciao.